Welcome back. In the midst of the focus on the fiscal cliff, a bipartisan group of senators want to know if the nation's biggest banks, those with $500 billion and more in assets, are getting preferential treatment in the marketplace. They've asked the Government Accountability Office to examine if so-called too-big-to-fail banks get better debt terms and credit ratings than smaller counterparts, because the market believes the government will bail them out if they get into trouble. Louisiana Republican Senator David Vitter co-authored the bill. He joins us now from Capitol Hill. Senator, good to have you on the program. Thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon, Maria. Good to be with you.
So do you suspect the GAO is going to find evidence that the nation's biggest banks are getting preferable treatment?
I do suspect that. I think too big to fail is alive and well. I think the markets know it, and I think the markets respond by giving too big to fail banks preferential treatment based on the biggest insurance policy imaginable.
Well, when you say preferential treatment, what does that involve? What's the treatment?
Well, I mean, that's what we need to quantify. That's why we're asking for the GAO study. I'm laying out my suspicions, but it could involve lower lending rates, for instance, when banks are borrowing money. It could involve a lot of lower rates and costs associated with too big to fail banks versus other institutions.
What other issues do you want the GAO to investigate?
That's really it. This is very focused on the concept and reality of too big to fail. And is that perception and reality causing market distortions in favor of the too big to fail institutions? That's something that's been debated, that's been talked about. We're trying to get to the bottom of that in a fairly systematic, academic way so we can have a serious discussion of it.
So do you have any evidence that they are getting preferential rates?
Well, sure. For instance, we're debating an issue right now, continuation of a program that a lot of regional banks want of insurance guarantees for certain types of their funds. And they say if this program, which exists now, stops existing after December 31st as is slated, they'll have a lot of deposits leave and go to too big to fail institutions because of that aura of too big to fail and protection. A lot of customers will move their money because they think it would be safer there, money beyond the FDIC insured limit. So that's just an example of the sort of market distortions that could be taking place.
Over in the House, Democratic Congressman Brad Miller sent a letter to the FDIC calling for a breakup of the big banks. Do you agree? Do you think regardless of what the GAO finds, you would also agree that you want a breakup of the big banks? Is that where you're headed?
No, I haven't gone that far. What I have focused on with my colleague Sherrod Brown is somewhat higher capital requirements. I think that would be a much less government intrusive way to address the situation. I think that would either make the big banks spin off some parts of their businesses to come down in size, or the taxpayer would have a lot more protection before the next bailout because the mega banks would have more capital.
And Dodd-Frank was supposed to end too big to fail. How come we're still talking about it?
Because it didn't. Because in my opinion, it's institutionalized. It hasn't ended it at all. And of course, that was one of the leading reasons I was against Dodd-Frank overall.
I mean, what's the point of Dodd-Frank if one of the key elements of it isn't even doing anything, and the rest of it, it's not even implemented yet?
Well, you know, I'm probably not the person to ask to defend Dodd-Frank because I voted against it. I was against it really every step of the way. In terms of what it was about, I would point to a very early quote from Rahm Emanuel, then White House Chief of Staff. He said, talking about the 2008 financial crisis, we're not going to let a good crisis go to waste. I think Dodd-Frank was 90% about advancing a pre-existing political agenda, not solving real problems that existed in the 2008 crisis.
Yeah, I think you're not alone in that belief. Senator, good to have you on the program. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Maria.
We'll be following your work. We'll